Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. Today's webinar, we're going to be having a look at our latest funding call, looking at the links between modern slavery and wider laws and policies. My name is Izzy Templar. I am the Research Operations and Communications Manager at the Modern Slavery PEC, and you'll be hearing from my colleagues throughout today's presentation. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's session. We'll be sharing this online after the webinar, but we'll only be sharing the presentation section. We will be recording a Q&A, but it's just for our note-taking purposes, so we can write up an FAQ document following the webinar. With that in mind, please feel free to add questions in the chat throughout today's webinar, and we'll pick them up during the Q&A and answer them all then. Likewise, if you have any technical problems, something's not working, let us know in the chat and we'll do our best to help you fix it. So today we're going to be covering a couple of items. We'll be having a look at sort of the Modern Slavery PEC overall and giving you an introduction to who we are. We'll be having an overview of the research call that we're talking about today. We'll have a chat through the application process and then ways of working with the Modern Slavery PEC. And we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So with that in mind, I'll hand over to Alex, who's going to be giving an introduction to the Modern Slavery PEC.
Thanks, Izzy, and welcome everyone. My name's Alex Balch. I'm Director of Research at the Modern Slavery PEC, and I'm going to be taking you through a brief introduction to who we are and what we do. We are a £10 million investment by UKRI, and we actually consist of 6 research institutes, and we have funding until April 2024. So our consortium includes the Bingham Centre, where we're hosted, the Alan Turing Institute, Oxford University's Bonavero Centre, and also the universities of Liverpool, Nottingham and Hull. So our mission is to enhance understanding of modern slavery and to transform the effectiveness of laws and policies to overcome it. And we, to begin with, started off with a consultation on evidence gaps and where we should prioritise our research. And through that process, we also established guiding principles which frame all of the work that we support. And those are guiding principles of effectiveness, equity and survivor involvement. And what that means is effectiveness as in what works. We're interested in how we can use research to establish the effectiveness of policies. We were aware that there's not enough research currently establishing how well things work. Equity refers to 2 things really: the structural inequalities which are often seen as root causes of modern slavery, but also equity in terms of who's involved in the research. So who gets the funding and who does the research, what sort of partnerships and what sort of collaborations are behind that and how they can be more equitable. And then finally, you know, the importance of survivor involvement in research, something that we are really trying hard to improve. And that means not just survivors or those with lived experience participating in research, but it means involvement in the entire process and the management of research itself. So we have 3 main ways that we support research. The first one is why we're here today. It's an open research call. These are the largest calls that we run, and they are managed with the AHRC and use the joint electronic submission system. So they might be quite familiar to academics in the UK who often use that system for applications. But there are 2 other ways that we support work. The second one is partner-led work strands. So that refers to the 6 partner institutions that make up the PEC. And each of those has a strand of work which consists of evidence reviews and policy briefs, and they really establish the evidence gaps and allow us to target our research. And then finally, responsive research, which is shorter term, smaller research projects that fill gaps that we've been made aware of through our engagement with stakeholders and help us to take advantage of opportunities for policy influencing. And I'll just hand over now to my colleague Olivia to talk about policy impact.
Thanks very much, Alex, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many people on today's call. My name's Olivia Hesketh and I'm Director of Policy Impact at the Modern Slavery PEC. And I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking through our general approach to policy impact at the centre. Policy impact is really central to the PEC's mission. We aim to generate evidence that influences both the development and implementation of laws and policies designed to address modern slavery in the UK. We aim to promote the uptake of evidence amongst various different audiences that we are trying to influence with our research, which includes businesses and policymakers. Overall, we aim to ensure that our research is relevant and timely. And by this, we mean that the research really speaks to live topics and issues that align with priorities for the audiences that we are trying to influence, but also that the insight and the findings from research are available at the most appropriate times in the development and implementation of policies and laws. We also aim to ensure that the research that we fund and commission is credible, that it's high quality and impartial and grounded in rigorous methodologies. And finally, that it's accessible and it's presented in a clear way to the audiences that we're trying to reach with our research. And it's framed in a way which speaks to their questions and needs. And we can, my colleague Jakob will speak a little bit later about the types of outputs that we produce in the Modern Slavery PEC. We build policy impact into all of the research that we do, and that actually starts with the design of research calls themselves. So the design of the call that we are discussing today was informed by consultation with multiple stakeholders, combined with our own assessment of priority evidence gaps and where we think there are the biggest opportunities to inform and influence policies and laws. Once funding has been awarded to successful projects, throughout the delivery of the project, the PEC offers support on policy impact, and that's very bespoke to each individual research project. So, for example, we can support teams with identifying the opportunities for policy impact. We can help facilitate engagement and interaction with policymakers, businesses, and other relevant audiences. And we can also help with putting together policy-focused outputs and framing recommendations from the research in the most impactful ways. And overall, we seek to work collaboratively throughout the whole project with teams in order to maximise the impact of the research. So I'm going to hand back to Alex now, who's going to talk through this specific call today and a bit more about the objectives and scope.
Thanks, Olivia. Yeah, so I'll talk about this particular call and start off with the aims and objectives. So first of all, I mean, it's worth emphasising the guiding principles that sort of frame all the work that the PEC funds, and that's obviously about high quality, impactful evidence, but also about those three values of effectiveness, equity, and survivor involvement. So that sort of goes without saying in a sense. Secondly, you know, the importance which Olivia just emphasised of the usability of that research, the importance of its value for policymakers and how it can influence decision making in relation to modern slavery. And then thirdly, and this is, I suppose, the bit that's unique to this call, it's about the wider laws and policies which can impact on modern slavery. And we're really interested in a portfolio of research projects that can help us to identify strategic ways in which policies can be redesigned. So how can policies be redesigned to better safeguard against modern slavery and reduce the risk of modern slavery? In the call documents, you'll see a little bit more detail about some of the policy and legal areas we're interested in particular. But as you'll see at the bottom of that list, we aren't saying that this is an exhaustive list and that we are open to proposals that include other policy areas. We just ask that there's a strong justification for a different policy area. So just to give you some examples and to just refer back to that call document and some of the examples in there. First of all, we think of legal and policy frameworks in the broadest sense. So that does include both the design and the implementation, regulation and enforcement. And some examples of work that we might be interested in seeing would be in relation to how wider policy and practice on safeguarding in different contexts, for example, health or social protection, and how implementation might help prevent modern slavery, or how different design of safeguarding could improve identification of potential victims. In the areas such as sex work, we know there's lots of debate about different models and approaches to law and policy on sex work, and we would be interested in projects that could deliver really impactful evidence demonstrating those differential effects on modern slavery or on those who are affected by it. Well, in relation to immigration and asylum, we know there's new developments in the policy arena right now and over the last year or two. So projects could look at new rules such as the points-based system of immigration or changes to the asylum system and ask how those designs include adequate safeguards against exploitation. With the labour market, there's obviously an interest in how non-compliance and lower so-called lower types of exploitation have causal relationships with more serious types. So, for example, causal relationships between patterns of non-compliance in the labour market, such as non-payment of minimum wage, and how that might relate to prevalence of modern slavery. Those are just a few examples. Happy to talk a bit more in the Q&A, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of the sort of thing we're looking at and the sort of portfolio of research projects we hope to fund to give us a much better picture of how wider laws and policies need to be redesigned to reduce or safeguard against modern slavery. So that's it from me. I'll pass on now to my colleague Kelly, who will tell you a bit more about the application process.
Thanks very much, everybody, and hello. My name is Kelly Ryan, and I'm the Operations Director at the Modern Slavery PEC. To kick off this section on the application process, I'm going to briefly run through the timeline for the course, and here on this slide you can see a few key dates. The most immediate and important date to remember is the 12th of November, which is the deadline for the expressions of interest to be submitted on our form. And do note that the form will close at 4 p.m. on the 12th of November, and it won't be possible to submit your EOI after that time, so please do make sure it's submitted before 4 p.m. After the deadline of the 12th of November, we will be reviewing the EOIs to check that they're in scope, and we expect to be able to communicate that feedback and next steps to everybody in early December. At that point, stage 2 of the process will commence for those invited applications, and project teams will be invited to submit full proposals on JES, which is the Joint Electronic Submission System. Alex mentioned before, for those who aren't familiar, that it's a system that's used by AHRC and all funders under the UK Research and Innovation banner. And then stage 2 will close on the 20th of January, again with a 4 p.m. cut-off time for submissions, and projects are expected to commence no later than the 1st of June 2022. I'll be going into a bit more detail on the application and assessment process on a later slide. So in terms of eligibility, as this funding comes from AHRC, the eligibility criteria for this call are in line with the standard AHRC expectations. Projects should be led by a university or an independent research organisation. And if you're not sure about your institution's eligibility to lead a project, there are some links in the call documentation which will give you the details on who is eligible to lead on these applications. As Alex mentioned earlier as well, a key objective that we have as a centre is to facilitate collaborations across disciplines and sectors and to diversify the research base undertaking research into modern slavery. And so for projects to be eligible, we're asking that they're undertaken collaboratively with at least one third sector organisation. When it comes to how many applications you can be involved in, academic PIs can only be involved in one application submission, but there's no limit to the number of applications a university or research organisation can submit, nor to how many applications a third sector organisation can collaborate on. Just to say here as well that businesses are not eligible to apply for funding through this course. However, we would really encourage for them to be involved and to collaborate as unfunded project partners. And we would hope that they would offer some kind of support to the project. So, for example, contributions of staff time, access to data, or expert insight and guidance. So, funding available. Here you can see the maximum budget available. At 100% full economic cost, it's £250,000 per proposal, and we're expecting to fund up to 5 proposals. In line with usual AHRC funding rules, universities and independent research organisations will be funded at 80% full economic cost. Third sector organisations will receive 100% of their costs, but their budget must not account for more than 30% of the total project cost. So, and this percentage as well is the combined total of the project budget. So if there are 2 third sector organisations taking part, their total costs when added together must not be more than 30% of the total project budget. Full details on the eligibility of costs can be found on the core guidance. I can see some things happening in the chat. I think perhaps I'm using some jargon here. So yeah, sorry about that. I did try to reduce it down as much as possible, but feel free to ask questions of me in the Q&A once I've finished this section. Apologies. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the process is going to look like, more in terms of what the assessment is going to look like, because that's more behind the scenes and we want to give you a bit of transparency on that. As a bit of background, this is the 3rd call that the Modern Slavery PEC has run in conjunction with AHRC. The first one was COVID-19 rapid response call. The second was a call to address the recovery of victims and survivors of modern slavery. This time around, we're running a slightly different process, and we've got a 2-stage process, and it includes this light touch expression of interest as its initial stage. And the reason that we've done this is because we want to try to remove and reduce some of those barriers to entry for our project funding as much as we possibly can. And we hope that this simple first step is going to give applicants the opportunity to engage with us a little bit earlier, and it gives you an opportunity to receive feedback before the full stage application, which is something that you wouldn't typically receive from a standard single stage process. And here at the Modern Slavery PEC, we are very committed to running fair and transparent assessment processes for all of our calls. So when we convene panels to review proposals, they always include independent reviewers from outside of the centre. For this expressions of interest stage, we'll be engaging a consultant with lived experience of modern slavery, and we'll be engaging our research coordination group. And this group is a group of external stakeholders that work alongside us from a variety of backgrounds, and that they work within the modern slavery sector. They work alongside us, but they are independent of us. This stage 1 process will review of all of the expressions of interest to ensure that they're within scope of the call. And I think it's important to mention here that this stage is just to ensure that proposals are within scope, and it's not an assessment of the quality of the proposal. To be in scope, expressions of interest must demonstrate that new evidence is being generated, that there's a link to a legal and policy framework area, and that there's a connection between that legal and policy framework area and the impact it has on modern slavery. As I mentioned before, a benefit of this first stage to you as applicants is not only that it simplifies the initial entry requirements, but it also means that applicants who are within scope will receive feedback from us on their proposal. And if you'd like a bit more detail on the type of feedback you can expect to receive if you are invited to stage 2, you can see page 13 of the core guidance. So at stage 2 of the process, we'll be handing things over to the Arts and Humanities Research Council. The expressions of interest that are within scope will be invited to submit a full application on JES via email by AHRC in early December. At this stage 2 point, we would like to see the feedback from stage 1 incorporated into our proposal. We would also like to see a section on policy impact within the case for support, and we're also requesting that an additional document is included which focuses on safeguarding. Full instructions on all of this will be sent by AHRC in early December once the initial stage review process is finished. Moving forward, once stage 2 is closed on the 20th of January 2022, which seems like a long way away, but in fact it's just a couple of months, AHRC will convene an assessment panel within that first quarter of the year. On that panel, they will assess the applications using a portfolio approach, and this means that as well as the quality of the proposals, the panel will be looking to ensure that a range of research covering different legal and policy areas are funded. And the reason that this will happen is that it allows us as a centre to ensure that we're funding a range of research which aligns with our objectives. Great, I've come now to the end of my section on the application process. As I said before, happy to take any questions in the Q&A, and I'm now going to hand over to Jakob, who'll be talking about conducting research.
Hi everyone, my name is Jakub Sobik. I'm a communications director at the Modern Slavery PEC, and I wanted to touch briefly at how the Modern Slavery PEC, how we will work with a successful research team. We realized that, we're not maybe working as most of other funders do when they just commission research and then come back at the end. We are much more involved in the work. So the relationship that we have with project teams is very much one of collaboration. We take collaboration very seriously, and we aiming to work with research teams on equal footing. So we aim to build a partnership which on one hand supports the independent research that the research teams carry out, and we very much respect the academic integrity. On the other hand, what we're trying to do is we're looking to maximize the policy and practice impact of the projects, and that's the reason that we'll be collaborating with research teams throughout the project. We're working with teams from the very start to the very end, from finalizing methodology to working on communicating the project, to developing outputs together and working on policy and communications impact. We'll do that through regular engagement. So what's going to happen is we're going to arrange an initial meeting at the beginning of the project to basically agree the ways of working together, and then to agree timelines and chat about potential for communications and policy impact opportunities, and basically just to say hello and set up a collaborative engagement throughout the project. And then we'll be meeting regularly throughout the project. Normally, in these kind of longer projects, we would look to meet every 6 weeks or so, but it really depends on individual projects. We're just going to sit down and agree what works best. And finally, I wanted to also touch on working together to develop, to kind of co-develop outputs. For starters, we're going to develop tailored communications and policy impact plans that will inform the development of these final outputs. We work on communications throughout the project, so from announcement of the project to the publication launch, and hopefully with loads in between, and hopefully potentially after the project too. To that end, I'm going to share a communications guidance with the team. This will include things like how to use our logo, how to refer to the PEC, what kind of disclaimers to use, but also some guidance that hopefully you find useful on framing and how to write reports, how to write policy briefing, which most of you obviously will know, but some might find it useful. But there will also be things like word limits for reports, because we appreciate that policymakers won't have time to troll through 100-page reports. So we'll be working together essentially on making sure that the outputs are accessible to people who we want to read it, essentially. We envisage 2 rounds of feedback from the Modern Slavery PEC, and that will be very much with policy impact lens on. We're not going to try to influence the findings, of course, but it's going to be more about how the findings are presented, so we can, again, present it in the most impactful and accessible way. Just a word on actual outputs. We're expecting teams to develop, at the very least, as a standard, a kind of full report at the end. This report, we're quite flexible about in terms of how it's going to be branded. Some research teams are keen to keep the organization's branding on the full report. Some are actually keen to brand it in a PEC branding. We're flexible about that, and we can talk about it with research teams and agree the preference. It can be a co-branding, so it can be something in between. Whatever is going to be, your logo will be on it. On the other hand, what we do as a minimum in a PEC branding is what we call research summary. So this is essentially an executive summary, but again, very much with policy lens on and policy focused, and that is going to be in the PEC branding. I include an example of it on the slide. I'm going to post a link to the chart where you can see more of them. And again, it depends on the project. We're going to sit down and discuss what other outputs might be appropriate. It could be a toolkit, it could be a guidance, whatever suits best for the project, essentially. Just finally, a word on campaigning, because that's the question that we get asked a lot, especially from third sector organizations on campaigning. We are not a campaigning organization, and therefore we cannot support any campaigning activities, nor can our funds be spent on campaigning outputs. However, NGOs and organizations are free to take the final outputs and use them as a kind of evidence base and use them to support evidence for their own campaigns afterwards. That's not a problem at all. Hopefully that clarifies a bit, and feel free to ask any questions in the chat. Thanks very much.